Finesse, we will sit this morning from 8 now until 9:30, I think. Is that the arranged time?
Yes, Your Honour.
And then take a short adjournment at 9:30 and resume again about 20 minutes later.
Thank you, Your Honour.
And sit through until midday Sydney time.
Thank you. Yes.
Very well.
Just to announce my appearance, Your Honour, I appear to assist the Commission with Mr Stewart of Senior Counsel and Mr Free, assisted by Ms Hahn, Ms Hagger and Ms Dargan. And I understand there may well be others who have not yet sought leave or announced their appearance.
Yes, there are many familiar faces, but are there any new faces? No?
Apparently not.
Your information probably not correct.
No.
Very well.
Your Honour, the hearing today and over the next few days is to hear evidence from Cardinal George Pell. As is known, Cardinal Pell was ordained a priest in the Diocese of Ballarat in 1966, and for part of the time he was a priest in Ballarat, he was also one of the consultors to Bishop Mulcairns. In that role, he had responsibilities, together with the other consultors, to give advice to the bishop on various matters, including the appointment of priests to particular parishes. Cardinal Pell was a consultor at a time when some of the priests who have offended against children were serving in the diocese. In 1987, Cardinal Pell was appointed an auxiliary bishop in the Archdiocese of Melbourne. Archbishop Little was the Archbishop of Melbourne during this time. In 1996, Cardinal Pell became Archbishop of Melbourne. Cardinal Pell is currently the Prefect of the Secretariat for the Economy for the Holy See. He resides outside of Australia and beyond the Royal Commission's jurisdiction. The Royal Commission does not have the power to compel Cardinal Pell to appear before it. Cardinal Pell has agreed to give evidence, and the Royal Commission decided that although it was preferable for the Cardinal to give evidence in Australia, it was satisfied that he could give evidence by video link from Rome, having regard to medical advice. Now, allegations have been made against Cardinal Pell by 4 witnesses who gave evidence in earlier hearings. Each of those witnesses, I understand, is represented, and accordingly I will leave to those representatives questioning Cardinal Pell about those allegations. I call Cardinal Pell.
Cardinal Pell? Cardinal, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Can you hear me? I can see you. Certainly I can hear you.
And hear me. Cardinal, it's necessary for you to be sworn. Is there a Bible there?
There is.
Would you take the Bible in your hand, please? And repeat after me. I swear by Almighty God.
I swear by Almighty God.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
That the evidence I shall give in this Royal Commission.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Place the Bible down. Yes, Ms Finesse.
Thank you, Your Honour. Cardinal, would you tell the Royal Commission your full name?
George Pell.
And your current position, Cardinal?
As you stated it, Prefect for the Economy here in the Vatican.
And that position, I think, was established in February 2014?
It was.
What is your function as Prefect of the Secretariat, Cardinal?
Something equivalent to a treasurer, to the treasurer.
So the Treasurer for the Vatican, is that right?
Yes, for the Holy See.
And is it the case that you have a delegation of some sort to be able to expend funds on behalf of the Vatican, or is your remit unlimited?
My remit is certainly not unlimited. I answer to the Council for the Economy, an international body of 15, 8 cardinals and 7 lay people. They are something like the University Senate, to whom I must answer.
Now, Cardinal, you're often described as the number 3rd person in the Vatican. Is that accurate?
I wouldn't say it was. People like to make these hypothetical lists. Some people would see the financial affairs of the Vatican as very low on the list.
Well, how would you describe yourself, Cardinal?
I wouldn't get into that game at all. I'm a senior official in the Roman Curia.
You said that some would see the financial affairs of the Vatican as very low. I take it you don't share that view.
No, I think it's very important that church money is used efficiently, that the donations are used for the running of the church and for the helping of the poor, that they're not wasted.
Has it been a matter that's been considered by you or those to whom you report or with whom you work to set aside funds for those who have been abused by clergy elsewhere in the world in circumstances where the diocese in which they were abused no longer have sufficient funds to compensate them?
As a preliminary clarification, my authority touches only the Vatican. Unlike most other Vatican councils or congregations, that is departments, they have some sort of authority around the world. We have the Holy Father, Pope Francis, has instituted a special commission for these matters. It's fairly young, but these responsibilities are met by national or local hierarchies, not by the Vatican.
When you say national, local hierarchies, are you speaking about the Archbishop, however that position is described, in various jurisdictions? Is that right?
Not exactly. Each diocese is headed by a bishop. They often get together in a region such as Victoria, New South Wales, and then there is an Australian Bishops' Conference.
And in the event that a diocese doesn't have sufficient funds to properly compensate those seeking claims on the basis that they'd been abused by the clergy, where would those people go if the diocese didn't have sufficient funds?
Well, I'm not sure we've ever been in that situation in Australia. I'm not sure of that. But they would go to the diocese would go to the other Australian dioceses, and religious orders would go to the other religious orders.
And the Vatican, as you see it, doesn't have a role?
No.
Now, you've referred to the Pontifical Commission for the Protection of Minors, which was set up in March 2014. Now,
Yes.
was your advice sought before that commission was established?
Yes, it was. I'm a member of what's called the Council of Cardinals. 9, we have no jurisdiction, but we're a council, informal council of advisors to Pope Francis.
Did you give advice?
I strongly supported the propositions that were presented to the group by Cardinal O'Malley, who is also a member of the 9.
And were those propositions ultimately translated into the commission as we see it today?
I believe so.
Now, one purpose of the commission is to propose initiatives to the Pope which are intended to repair the damage, to attach justice and to prevent the recurrence of similar incidents in the future. Now, have there been any such initiatives proposed to the Pope?
I couldn't give book, chapter and verse on this, but certainly they have been active, the Commission in different parts of the world, I think particularly speaking of the church leadership in the Philippines and in India. I'm not a member, of course, of that commission.
When you say they've been active in different parts of the world, what do you mean?
I believe that one of the principal functions of the group is to ensure that appropriate procedures are put in place and there's an appropriate sensitivity amongst the church leadership.
Procedures for the operation of the commission? Or procedures in relation...
No, for the operation... I'm sorry.
Procedures for the prevention of sexual abuse by clergy and religious?
For the prevention and dealing with crimes.
Now, the Commission was said to be provided with adequate human and material resources. Can you tell us who determined what was adequate human and material resources for that purpose?
I think they made direct representations to the Holy Father. I wasn't involved in any sums, but I made it quite clear at the Council of the Cardinals that whatever they needed should be made available to them.
So that was not a matter that you had to make a decision in respect of the quantum of money to be provided?
No, not at all.
I asked you earlier, Cardinal, whether the Commission had given any advice to the Pope, and you spoke in terms of activity. Can you tell us whether or not there has been any advice given to the Pope?
I'm not quite sure. I will arrange for it to be tabled. The Commission put out a report on what it has achieved and what it is doing November or December last year. That is available in English, and I can arrange for it to be made available to yourselves.
Presumably it can be found on an appropriate website, Cardinal? Do you know?
I would believe so. I would believe so.
Now, in June last year, Pope Francis approved the establishment of a special tribunal within the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith to judge bishops accused of protecting priests who sexually abuse children. Now, was your advice sought prior to the establishment of that tribunal?
I don't believe so.
Was that a matter that the 9 cardinals you referred to earlier were provided with the opportunity to advise?
I'd have to be careful. My mind is not entirely clear, but I don't think so. I think that was set up. Was set up independently.
Independently of the 9 cardinals.
There's only one of us. Pardon?
Independently of the 9 cardinals.
Yes, you see, we have no jurisdiction, no official place. We're an informal body of advice to the Holy Father, especially for the reform of the Roman Curia. That's been our almost exclusive concern.
As I understand... I'm sorry, Cardinal, go on.
No, that's okay.
As I understand the document which was published, which established the tribunal, it referred to the Council of the Cardinals agreeing unanimously on the proposals and resolved that they be submitted to the Holy Father. Now, the Council of Cardinals is the body you've referred to?
It is.
And it also refers to the Council of Cardinals having authorised the provision of sufficient resources for this purpose or indicated to the Pope that such a thing should be done. Now, do you have a recollection of that?
In general terms, yes, only in general terms.
And again...
It's completely uncontroversial.
Again, whose role was it to determine the sufficiency of resources in relation to that tribunal?
I presume the tribunal would make recommendations to the Holy Father and the Secretariat of State.
Mm-hmm. So not in relation to your area?
No, we don't directly control funds at all.
Mm-hmm. Are you aware whether any appointments have been made to that tribunal?
I think there have been. I'm not completely sure. I'm not sure how it is functioning or whether it has started.
So it may not have...
I'm not a canon lawyer.
It may not have commenced. Is that what you're saying, Cardinal?
No, it's not exactly what I'm saying, because I'm not quite sure how far it's gone.
Does that tribunal propose, as far as you know, to produce public material about its work?
I would imagine that it would report, yes, its work.
Thank you. Now, Cardinal, no doubt you're aware there has been some publicity recently about the training given to bishops from Rome in relation to reporting obligations. Are you familiar with what I'm saying?
Yes, there was one talk there given where the advice was unfortunate and it was rejected by the commission you've been mentioning.
So
the speaker was one part of a series. For example, I spoke on the finances, he spoke on things psychological in this area.
And his advice that bishops should not necessarily consider themselves bound to report regardless of the civil laws was rejected by the Commission. Is that what you're saying?
That's correct.
So what's the position of the Vatican in relation to reporting obligations?
That the law of the land should be followed.
Thank you. Now, as you're aware, Cardinal, child sexual abuse by clergy has been an issue in the Church for centuries, in that there have been various rules and pronouncements in relation to it. You're aware of them?
I'm aware that this has been a problem right across society and unfortunately also in the Church for centuries, as you said.
Now, it's also the case, as I'm sure you're aware, Cardinal, that there has been many inquiries around the world in relation to child sexual abuse and the Catholic Church. You're aware that there's been many inquiries?
Are these government inquiries or church inquiries?
Well, there's a combination of both. There's been some government inquiries, some church or church-commissioned inquiries in areas such as Canada, Chicago, Massachusetts, Ireland, the Netherlands and the like.
Yes, I'm not sure that they're all exclusively just on the Catholic Church. I'd imagine some of them would be very appropriately like the Royal Commission and touch on the problem right across the institutions right across society.
But you would accept that there has been many inquiries which have dealt either in full or in part with the Catholic Church?
That is correct.
And of those inquiries which have done so, there appears to be a consistency in their findings in respect of the response of the Catholic Church to allegations. And that consistency seems to be in relation to those in more senior positions not taking the action that a reasonable person thought should be taken in respect of those allegations. Now, you're familiar with that?
Let me just say this as an initial clarification, and that is I'm not here to defend the indefensible. The Church has made enormous mistakes and is working to remedy those. But the Church has, in many places, certainly in Australia, has mucked things up, has made, let people down. I'm not here to defend the indefensible.
No, I wasn't particularly asking you to, Cardinal. The question is in relation to the consistency of findings of inquiries in many places in the world in relation to the actions of senior officials in the Catholic Church. Now, you accept that that is the case. that there has been a consistency of findings in relation to the response of the Church?
Unfortunately, there's a lot of truth. I would also say there are very few countries in the world who have advanced as far as the Catholic Church has in Australia in putting procedures into place nearly 20 years ago. I think that's a matter of record.
Can you help us, Cardinal, with why you think it is that the Catholic Church has operated in such a similar way across many different countries in the world?
Unfortunately, original sin is alive and well, the tendency to evil in the Catholic Church too, and sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse, but for good or for ill, the Church follows the patterns of the societies in which it lives.
So you wouldn't suggest that it's just a case of a few bad apples, as it were, within the Church?
I've never suggested that.
And you wouldn't think that it's the case of a few weak or inactive leaders in the Church?
No, unfortunately, they weren't necessarily few.
Does it suggest to you any structural problems in the way in which the Church operates?
There are many levels of structures, and we'd have to be specific. I don't think it calls into questions the divine structure of the Church, which goes back to the New Testament, the role of Pope and bishops. I think the faults overwhelmingly have been more personal faults, personal failures rather than structures. Let me remind you that the reforms in 96-97 occurred within the old structures.
The reforms you're referring to are the Melbourne response and towards healing? Is that right?
That is correct.
And I think with each of those reforms, there have been issues in relation to the independence of the operation of those reforms. You understand that?
There have been questions, certainly in the material with which I was associated. I worked very hard to make sure there was independence of the judgment from the leadership of the Church. Now, once again, these have been shown to be imperfect, but that particular form of independence I think, both towards healing and the Melbourne response, the independence in actually coming to decisions, I believe that was achieved in most cases.
You understand that the Royal Commission has published a report on redress, Cardinal?
Yes, I have. I've studied that.
And what's your view of the appropriateness of the structures recommended for the Catholic Church?
I would like to see a national system of redress which could be accessed by the churches, and one in which the culpable parties would contribute whatever to the payment of whatever the findings were.
And that system would do away with any questions of independence, such as those questions which arise in relation to towards healing and the Melbourne response? Is that right?
Well, it would clearly show that such payments are not dependent on the decisions of the Catholic Church. And no matter how fair and independent an agency funded by the Church might be, there's always the danger that it will be found to be subservient. Now, this is a problem faced by all judicial or legislative, not so much legislative, all such bodies. They're paid for by the government, and the government has to, of course, ensure that they are able to work independently.
But in those cases, Cardinal, it's not the case, is it, that the government agency has been responsible for the abuse, which is the subject of the claim?
Could you repeat that, please?
Certainly. But in those cases, it's not the case, is it, that the government agency has been responsible for the abuse, which is the subject of the claim?
No, but everyone is under the legislative power of the government, and it's such a situation of independence that I would like to see for the Catholic Church.
Now, just turning to Ballarat, if I can, Cardinal. As is well known, you were born in Ballarat.
I was.
And where was your schooling?
At Loretto Convent in Ballarat and at St Patrick's College.
Now,
in Ballarat also.
Thank you. Now, without wanting to embarrass you, Cardinal, it's the case that growing up you excelled at sport as well as academically?
I had some capacity in both areas.
I think you're being modest, Cardinal.
Thank you.
Now, your family was quite well known in Ballarat. They ran the local or one of the local hotels.
Yes, I wouldn't want to exaggerate just how well known they were, but they did have, yes, a hotel there.
Can I suggest, Cardinal, that you were identified early on as a prospective leader of the Church?
I wouldn't plead guilty to that. Probably my bishop gave me educational opportunities because he saw that as a possibility.
You studied in Rome?
I did.
Were there any other priests who you were associated with during your time in Ballarat who studied in Rome?
Yes, quite a number of them.
And you...
many of my contemporaries, unfortunately, did not get ordained, or it was a turbulent time, or left after ordination, left the priesthood.
What was the turbulent time you're referring to?
This was the 60s. We had the Vatican Council, and you would remember at the start of the 60s we had the invention of the contraceptive pill, which has provoked a social revolution.
And the priests that didn't get ordained, there was some relationship between that and what you've just described?
Yes, it would vary enormously from person to person, but here in the Roman colleges and seminaries it was a very interesting time, and it wouldn't be entirely misleading to say there was a whiff of a revolutionary spirit about, but I don't want to overemphasise that. A lot of good people decided to follow other paths.
Paths outside of the Church?
No, not outside the Church, outside the priesthood. Overwhelmingly, they remained within the Church.
Thank you. Now, you also obtained a doctorate from Oxford in Church History. That's right?
That is correct.
And that would have been an unusual qualification to have had among fellow priests in Ballarat?
Yes, I was one of the first, perhaps the first Catholic priest to take a DPhil in the theology faculty since the Reformation.
And that qualification, I take it, was paid for by the Church insofar as it cost money?
Yes, and in those far-off days, the British government paid the university fees for all students, including overseas students. I've always been very grateful to the United Kingdom for that.
So the Church wasn't out of pocket?
Oh, they were, yes. They had to pay board for me.
Now, you returned to Ballarat after studying, and you had various positions as assistant priest, which I'll take you to later. But it seems that education and the education of children became an area of particular interest to you?
The Bishop asked me to take a role in that area, and I did so happily.
And you ultimately attained a Master's in Education, I think, in the early 80s?
I did.
Now, the first position, as I understand it, you had in relation to education was to be appointed to the Episcopal Vicar for Education?
I'm not sure whether it was actually the first, but it was certainly a very early such appointment.
That was, as I understand it, in 1973 and continued until 1984. Does that sound right to you?
That is correct.
Now, as I understand what you've said in the past about that position, it was a significant source of advice to the Bishop on education and supports and oversaw those working in the Catholic education. Now, that's as you saw the role?
The way I saw the role, the way I will try to describe it, is the way it was, and that is I was the Bishop's representative. That meant that I chaired the Catholic Ballarat Diocesan Education Commission. I sometimes represented the Bishop at openings and things like that, celebrations like that. And actually most of my time was spent. I was also chairman of the board of a small teachers' college called the Sacred Heart Teachers' College, and most of my time educationally was spent with trying to ensure its survival. And it did survive as the Aquinas campus now of Australian Catholic University.
You also, as I understand it, described the role as the essential link between the bishop, priests, parents, teachers and students. Now that's how you saw the role, isn't it?
I would be very interested to see where I said that. I think it somewhat overstates my role. I was not the Director of Education.
Well, perhaps if I can show you a document, Cardinal. I hope that those with you have a copy of this document. It's a note under your hand, Cardinal, dated the September 20, 1984, from you to Bishop Mulcairns. Now, this document has only very recently come to light, so I apologise for it not having been provided earlier. Now, are those with you, Cardinal, have they provided you with a copy of that document?
I don't think so.
You don't have access to a screen with documents, do you, Cardinal?
I believe not.
Well, I'm sure it will come to you shortly. While that's waiting, perhaps if I can read the first page to you. It begins, "My Lord, please find enclosed some thoughts on the role of the Episcopal Vicar for Education," and then "with your best wishes." And over the page, there's your thoughts as to roles and functions. Has it been provided to you yet, Cardinal?
No, Council.
Well, we'll do our best to get one to you as soon as we can. And that document in the second paragraph under role, and I'll read it for you, "The position is normally held by a diocesan priest, but could be filled by a religious man or woman. Through this clerical religious presence, education is seen as one vital part of the Church's apostolate."
Here's the document.
You have it? Oh, good. Do you see that second paragraph under the heading role?
I do.
And do you see the last phrase is that the essential link between bishop, priests, parents, teachers and students is also emphasised?
I think that the emphasis there is on the religious presence, of course. Yes, I do see what is there. Could I just say many dioceses do not have episcopal vicars for education, and I was keen for the role to continue.
Well, the role to continue in the way in which you've expressed it in this document.
That's correct.
Your Honour, I tender that document.
Yes, where are we up to?
147.
147 in the Ballarat.
Yes.
So 28,147.
As I understand it.
That's very well. We'll mark it as Exhibit 28-147.
Before you move on, could I draw your attention to some of the elements in that document, please?
Certainly.
The vicar is the bishop's representative in all areas of education, significant source of advice to the bishop on education, supports and oversees those working. This is not an executive role, although the vicar might have other executive positions. Then there's the paragraph you mentioned. The chair of the Diocesan Education Board, which makes policy recommendations, as it mentions the role as the chair, to encourage cooperation and dialogue, to be an active ex officio member of the advisory board of the Ballarat campus of the Institute of Catholic Education, and to encourage the provision of chaplaincy services. But that's entirely compatible with how I explained it to you.
Thank you, Cardinal. It's also compatible with the phrase I put to you in relation to the essential link, isn't it?
Well, I would like to read. The position is normally held by a diocesan priest, but could be filled by a religious man or woman. Through this clerical religious presence, education is seen as one vital part of the Church's apostolate. This religious presence, the essential link between bishop, priests, parents, teachers and students is also emphasised. So just what is that essential link? It certainly would include the role of the Episcopal Vicar.
Thank you. Now, in your role as Episcopal Vicar, did you from time to time visit schools that were diocesan schools?
Very rarely. Perhaps for the opening, blessing of a wing or an extension. I had no regular such role because I was a full-time academic in the Institute of Catholic Education.
And you were a full-time academic from 1974 to 1984, I think. Is that right?
I think that's correct.
And in the first year you were Episcopal Vicar, you held that position at the same time as having a position as assistant priest. Is that right?
That's correct. And I was chaplain, a school chaplain, St Martin's in the Pines, and I also lectured part-time at the then Sacred Heart Teachers College.
Thank you. In your role as Episcopal Vicar for education, did any teacher, principal, parent or school teacher or child approach you about problems at any of their schools?
Well, that's difficult. I mean, there are many problems that arise in schools which would be taken up by the Education Office or by the Council for the Diocesan Council for Education. So, yes, people would speak to me sometimes about problems.
And the problems that they spoke to you about, were they problems of difficulties with teachers and principals in relation to being overly affectionate or in some way touching them?
Well, it's a long time ago, but I can't remember such complaints, and normally they would have been addressed to the Education Office, not to the Vicar.
Well, that may be the case that normally they would be addressed, but from time to time they came to your attention, either before or after the Catholic Education Office?
Well, I can't remember any such examples, but my memory might be playing me false.
Why might your memory be playing you false?
Because I don't have perfect recall.
So it may have happened, but you can't remember now. Is that the effect of what you're saying?
No, I think you're putting words into my mouth. I don't remember any such thing happening, and therefore I don't believe it did. But my memory is sometimes fallible.
Cardinals, I was just repeating what you said in different language. What you said was, I can't remember any such examples, but my memory might be playing me false. That's the answer you give?
That is the answer, no more and no less.
Now, you've spoken of your time as the director of the Aquinas campus of the Institute of Catholic Education. As director, were you responsible for the operation of the campus?
I was.
During your decade at the campus, did you institute any policies or procedures in relation to complaint handling?
About what matters?
About complaints?
That would have been covered in some sections on the course. They were not, I did not participate, as far as I recall, in those components. Look, the thing would be to examine the handbook to see just what was done.
Mm-hmm. And now you were, and the campus was primarily concerned with educating people to be teachers?
Yes, the campus was one part of a 3 or 4 campus institution called the Institute of Catholic Education, and the courses were decided by the academic board, who would recommend them to the council. And we, in Ballarat, at that stage, we were perhaps exclusively preparing primary teachers.
As part of preparing primary teachers, do you recall whether there was any emphasis on protective behaviours for children?
I can't remember what there was or to what extent there was.
Do you recall that that was a developing issue in the decade that you were in that role?
No, it wasn't a particularly a topic which was discussed enormously at all. That happened, a significant advance in understanding and level of discussion took place from the middle 80s onwards, the late 80s in particular.
And that level of discussion, are you referring to the Catholic Church generally or the educational components of it?
I think the Catholic Church generally, as well as the educational component.
Thank you. Now, Cardinal, over the years you've made a number of comments, or at least in some cases you've been reported as having made a number of comments about your time in the Diocese of Ballarat. Now, if I can suggest a number of views that you've held, and by all means tell me if they don't accurately represent your views. Now, you've said that the general attitude of the Church to disclosures of child sexual abuse before that period of time you've described, that is the late 80s, was generally to not believe the child. Do you accept that?
I think that, no, I would now say that is an overstatement, but it certainly was much, much more difficult for the child to be believed then.
There was
a predisposition not to believe.
And the predisposition was also to be dismissive of those complaints.
If they were not presented clearly, but it would vary from person to person, and there was never any suggestion that these, officially at any rate, that such accusations should be rejected out of hand.
When you say officially, what do you mean?
That there were no such statements by Catholic Education Office or the bishops or by official agencies.
But unofficially, it's the case, isn't it, that most complaints in the period of time we're talking about tended to be dismissed. Do you accept that?
I don't have the statistics on that, but too many of them certainly were dismissed, and sometimes they were dismissed in absolutely scandalous circumstances.
When you say absolutely scandalous circumstances, can you provide an example of what
Well,
you're
there were
referring to?
very plausible allegations made by responsible people that were not followed up sufficiently.
By responsible people, are you meaning adults?
By officials, I mean adult officials.
I'm sorry, I misunderstood you. You said there were very plausible allegations made by responsible people that were not followed up sufficiently. I understood you to mean that the complaints were made by responsible people, not to responsible people. Am I wrong?
That's my hypothesis. Yes, that's what I was talking about. These were reasonable complaints which were dealt with very poorly.
Now, in addition, there was a tendency to seek to protect the reputation of the church and its assets in the response to these allegations?
At that stage, the instinct was more to protect the institution, the community of the church from shame. I'm not sure at that stage there was too much concern about protecting assets.
Mm-hmm. That became an issue later on.
It did.
The tendency also at that time was not to report to civil authorities.
I think that is the case, although there were a number of such cases reported to the police, but the general community attitudes were different within the police, within the government service, within the Catholic Church, were different from what they are now.
So is it the case that there was a tendency within the church not to report allegations to the police at that time?
That was, I think, the general practice. That is different from saying that people were prevented or impeded, but they certainly were rarely encouraged.
Thank you. Now, there was also a belief among some at that time that offenders could be treated.
Yes, that's certainly true.
Mm-hmm. And that the sexual abuse of children was largely seen as a moral sin or failing rather than a crime.
Well, that's a different thought from your previous thought. It certainly, in every age, remains as a moral failure and as a sin. It is also a crime, and one element that contributed to the catastrophic treatment, it was well intended, but there was an overestimate of what could be done through psychological and psychiatric treatment.
You were aware at the time that from time to time priests who believed by the bishop to have been offending were referred off for treatment?
Well, you would have to be specific about who and when, because people could go off for treatment for a whole variety of purposes, and sometimes the most important reason was not mentioned, and in many cases not reasonably suspected.
Well, it's the case, isn't it, that you were aware during the 70s and early 80s that the bishop was sending Ridsdale off for treatment for sexual offending against children?
No, that's certainly not correct.
Was there any other priest that you were aware of in the 70s and early 80s who was sent off for treatment by Bishop Mulcairns for believed or perceived sexual offending?
No, I wasn't aware of Mulcairn sending anyone off for sexual offending.
Sexual offending of any type?
Well, an offence is, I presume, something against the law. If a priest is engaging in sexual behaviour, either heterosexually or homosexually, that's incompatible with his continuing as a priest, and it's possible that people were sent off, but once again, I'd have to hear who or what to say to reply specifically. If a person is repentant, and the repentance is very real, the bishop would, if he judged that to be real, there was a real purpose of amendment, that they would get spiritual counselling and psychological help to ascertain, to help them continue to do the right thing and to ascertain whether that was likely.
Cardinal, all that council is asking you for are the names of any priest you can remember who was sent off for treatment by Cardinal Pell. That's all.
By Bishop Mulcairns?
Oh, sorry, Bishop Mulcairns.
Or by Cardinal Pell?
No, by Bishop Mulcairns, I'm sorry. You're just being asked for any name you can remember.
Well, I can... it was long after I'd gone from the diocese, but Ridsdale was sent off for such treatment to the United States.
Is he the only priest you can recall being sent off for treatment by Bishop Mulcairns for matters of a sexual nature?
I think that's the case.
What about Paul David Ryan?
I'm not sure that Ryan was... I'm not well versed on Ryan. I didn't have much to do with his story. He did do studies in the United States, I believe, but I don't think they had anything to do with therapy.
So is the answer to my question that you don't know of Paul David Ryan being sent off for treatment by Bishop Mulcairns for matters of a sexual nature?
I don't have any clear such recollection. I certainly never heard that he was being helped because he was a pedophile.
Mm-hmm. What about...
He might have had other...
I'm sorry, Cardinal, I interrupted you. He might have had other...
he might have had other problems, which are problems for a Catholic priest, but I'm not quite sure what years we're talking about here.
We're talking about the period that you were at Ballarat, 1971 to about 1984.
I was seeking to find out the years in which Ryan did his studies, or was ordained or prepared.
Well, Ryan was...
within that 71 to 84.
Ryan was ordained in about 1976, and he was sent off to Washington in about 1977. I'm sure those...
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Now, you referred to him might have had other problems, which are problems for a Catholic priest. Now, consensual adult sexual relations would fall within that category, wouldn't they?
Yes.
Whether it be with a man or a woman.
That's correct.
So do you recall being advised or becoming aware of any information about Paul David Ryan being sent off for treatment in about 1977 for that sort of sexual behaviour?
I don't have any clear such recollection.
Now,
could I just say that I was never officially asked, but Ryan had an unusual style. I was never particularly supportive of his vocation.
why not?
Because of that style, but I didn't have to make the decision. I just tell you my set of attitudes, and of course, it would have been wrong for me to conclude anything from his attitudes about his activities.
Cardinal, you answered Council's question by saying that you don't have any clear recollection of whether Ryan was sent for treatment for his sexual behaviour. What is your recollection? What
I had hoped to say, if I could make it a little more specific, I have no clear recollection of my knowing that he was sent off for such treatment at that time.
But what is your recollection? What do you recall?
I can't clearly recall him being